helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformation with Michael Hart, award-winning psychotherapist, author, and Canadian certified counselor.
Thank you for joining us today on this episode of the Life Transformation Show. We are continuing our powerful series, Great Women of the Bible. We will be discussing stories of courage, faith, and transformation and how they speak into our lives today. So today's topic is Esther, the power of timing and discernment. And we will be looking at this remarkable woman in Scripture. Her story reveals the power of discernment, divine timing, and unwavering faith in God. Esther's courage saved an entire nation, and her wisdom continues to inspire believers today. But before we start, if you're new to this show or need counseling support, you can find us at elimcounselingministry.com or by calling 613-699-1677 or 1-877-204-2914. And listeners, I am so excited again to welcome you or to invite you to our upcoming healing retreat entitled Restored and Transformed. This will be a powerful weekend devoted to emotional healing and lasting freedom. So join us on June 12th through June 14, 2026. And this intimate Bible-based retreat experience is designed to help you find freedom from emotional pain, break negative generational patterns, and heal deep emotional wounds. You still are able to get the early bird rate, so please get your name on the list by going to elimcounselingministry.com. We would truly love to see you there. And as usual, in studio with me is psychotherapist and author Michael Hart of Elim Counseling Services. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, Denise. It's so good to be back in studio, and especially to do this important series on great women of the Bible. Because contrary to what many people think, the Bible elevates women to positions of influence and power. And so last week it was a blast to do the first show in the series about Deborah in the book of Judges. And today I'm excited to continue as we talk about Esther, a great woman who had an entire book of the Bible named after her.
Exactly, Michael. So before we talk about Esther's timing and discernment, can you help us understand the historical and cultural context in which she lived?
Yes, so Esther's story unfolds within the Persian Empire under King Xerxes, and also known as Ahasuerus, a ruler whose kingdom stretched across 127 countries from India to Kush. So this was a vast territory. And this made him one of the most powerful monarchs of his time and of antiquity. So from a cultural perspective, Esther's rise to queen is extraordinary. She was a woman in a patriarchal society, a Jew living in exile, and an immigrant navigating a foreign culture. So despite these challenges, God positioned her in the palace for, as the book of Esther says, for such a time as this. And this is in Esther 4:14. So psychologically, Esther demonstrates what we call here secure identity, one rooted in faith and values rather than in external validation. So even while assimilating into the Persian society, she remained faithful to her Jewish heritage and to her spiritual convictions. So this stability is so essential. when identity is rooted in God, individuals will remain anchored despite external pressures. And I think this is what got Esther through the troubles and the persecution and even the discrimination that she must have faced as an immigrant in that society.
So that's fascinating, Michael. You know, Esther's story really reminds me of Jeremiah 29, verse 7, which encourages believers to seek the welfare of the city where God has placed them. And in Esther, she served faithfully in a foreign country without compromising her identity. So, what does her experience teach us about maintaining our values while navigating a new culture or unfamiliar environment?
That's such a good question, Denise. And so Esther's life teaches us the importance of cultural adaptation without spiritual compromise. She learned to function effectively within a Persian society while being faithful to her heritage and her God. So this balance reflects emotional intelligence and psychological resilience. So her stability, to me, her stability stands in contrast to identity issues that we find in mental health conditions such as bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder, where individuals struggle with an unstable sense of self. So while these are clinical conditions requiring compassion and treatment, these conditions illustrate how essential a stable sense of identity is for emotional and relational well-being. You may have friends who you know or people you know who have an unstable sense of self. And it's very unsettling because one moment they're a witch, the other moment they're a Christian, the next moment they're a Muslim, and you just can't seem to figure out what's the true identity of this person. And so those kind of swing from one extreme to another is usually a sign that something is wrong mentally and spiritually. By contrast, we see Esther's identity was grounded in her Jewish faith. So similar to Jesus, Esther demonstrated, she showed an unwavering sense of purpose. So Jesus, for example, declared, I must do the will of him who sent me in John 6:38. So we see that Jesus had this sense of self, this stability, that he refused to be swayed by the culture he was living in. He refused to be swayed by the politics of the time or by the spiritual hierarchy of the time. And he remained faithful to the mission that God sent him on earth to accomplish when he said, I must do the will of him who sent me. So like Christ, Esther's life was guided by divine purpose rather than societal pleasures. So someone listening to this show today may feel like an outsider, navigating a new culture, a new career, or maybe it's just an unfamiliar season of life. And you may feel as if there is pressure being put on you to compromise your values in order to fit in. But Esther's story reminds us that you can adapt without losing your identity. You can play a valuable role in society while remaining true to your values. So when your life is rooted in God, you can remain faithful no matter where he places you.
Oh, Michael, that's deeply encouraging for me. And you know, it aligns with Romans 12:2, which urges believers not to conform to the patterns of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of their minds. And Michael, what you have shared about Esther's identity, it really highlights her inner strength. Yet, her greatest test came when she was called to risk her life. So, how did her faith and community support prepare her for that moment?
So that question brings us to the very heart of Esther's story. When Mordecai informed her of Haman's plot to destroy the Jewish people, Esther faced an unimaginable decision. Approaching the king without being summoned could result in her death. Yet, on behalf of her people, she was able to muster the courage to do the unthinkable, to go to the king without being summoned. And so she said in Esther 4 verse 16, "Go gather together all the Jews and fast for me." So she's telling Mordecai to get the Jews to fast for her. And then she continued, "When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law." And this, what she says next, is the key. She said, "And if I perish, I perish." This is extraordinary courage under pressure. She was doing something that could cost her her life, but she is living for a purpose that's bigger than herself. And she is making this decision to go before the king. And she's saying, "If I perish, I perish." So Esther here is humbling herself, giving her will over to her sovereign God and saying, "God, my life is in your hand. I am praying, I am fasting, but I do not know how this is going to turn out. I may die in the process, but I am willing to die for a bigger cause." And so this moment demonstrates Esther's reliance on her spiritual community and on divine guidance. She did not act impulsively. Instead, Esther sought prayer and fasting and unity among her people. From a psychological standpoint, this reflects the importance of social and spiritual support system. All the studies show that having such a support system, a spiritual support system, that this is good for your mental health and it strengthens your resilience during times of crisis. The problem with many of us is that we have become isolated. We have turned away from groups that have the same faith like us. And so we fall prey to the crisis that we find ourselves in.
Esther is truly inspiring, Michael, really. And I'm reminded of Jesus' words in Matthew 18:20. "For where two or three gather in my name, there I am with them." We will be right back. You have been listening to the Life Transformation Show, where award-winning psychotherapist and author Michael Hart of Elim Counseling Services has been speaking on the topic Esther, the power of timing and discernment. You can find out more about us at elimcounselingministry.com or by calling 613-699-1677 or 1-877-204-2914. Please consider making a donation to this Christ-centered ministry through Elim Mental Health Foundation. Your donations help us to stay on the air and to provide subsidized counseling to those who can't afford it. So, Michael, let's talk now about the wisdom behind her timing. And this is found in Esther 5-7. What makes Esther's approach to confronting the king and exposing Haman so extraordinary?
What stands out for me, Denise, in that account is her strategic restrained. She must have been emotionally touched and troubled by the situation, but yet she showed tremendous restraint. She didn't barge into the king's palace and said, "If I perish, I perish." She asked for fasting and prayer and said, "After 3 days, I will approach the king." And this reminds me of an incident with a friend of mine some years back where her son was doing drugs, and she found out where he was meeting with the gang members and doing drugs. And she didn't think what she was doing. She stormed through the door of the house where these gang members were. She went in, and there was about 5 men, she explained, around the table. And she turned over the table with the drug, and there was even a gun, and she turned over the table with the gun and the drugs. And these 5 men were looking at this 5'2" lady and wondering, what is she doing? And they were all stunned because they're thinking, this lady must be with the CIA. Maybe she know karate or something, or kung fu, why she's doing all of this. But she said after she overturned the table and she saw the gun on the floor and she saw these big drug lords looking at her, she said to herself, what have I got myself into? What am I going to do now? So she didn't think it through. Luckily, she survived. Luckily, they did not harm her. But I'm saying, without thinking, she could have been killed. And so I find that Esther gave great thought. And Esther 5:1 tells us about the 3 days of fasting. So instead of immediately presenting her request, she invites the king and Haman to a banquet. And this reflects remarkable discernment and emotional intelligence. Psychologically, this is known as emotional regulation, the ability to manage one's emotion and respond thoughtfully rather than impulsively. Some of us have gotten ourselves fired because we are too impulsive. We don't think before we act. Some of us have ruined good relationships because we don't think before we act. But Esther's patience illustrates what Proverbs 16:32 says. Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city. And it is so important for us to mark this scripture down and operate with this principle in mind, that patience is better than someone who is a mighty warrior. Sometimes we get so upset that we are in fight mode and we don't remember that we need to take time to pause, to reflect, and to pray. And this is what is remarkable about Esther's story. She did all of that.
That is so true, Michael. A lot of us are still praying for patience. So Esther seems to understand that wisdom is not only about what to say, but when to say it. I love that. And earlier you spoke about Esther's emotional regulation. So what other insights can you give us about her strategy and how does it relate to our lives today?
So I'd like to say that Esther's strategy demonstrates exceptional discernment and impulse control. So instead of acting out of fear or urgency, she creates the conditions necessary for truth to be revealed. Sometimes when we act too quickly, we do not give things time to unfold in our favor. So by inviting the king and Haman to not one banquet, but to 2 banquets, she allowed time for events to unfold, including for the king to be troubled with insomnia. And it was during this time when the king went through a period where he couldn't sleep that God brought Mordecai, a relative, to his mind and said, has any favor been shown to Mordecai? And so God had time to work these situations out in the king's life, so that he would have insomnia, so that he would remember Mordecai. And if Esther had acted quickly, none of this would have happened. And so this to me highlights the importance of waiting and praying before acting. From a psychological perspective, this reflects strategic thinking and delayed gratification. So research in behavior psychology shows that individuals who practice patience and self-control tends to make wiser decisions and achieve better outcomes. Esther demonstrates these principles, and we see from the scripture the effectiveness of her actions. So her actions also illustrate Proverbs 15:23, which says, "A person finds joy in giving an apt reply, and how good is a timely word." So this is saying that a timely word, a word for the right time, when Esther said, "I'm here for such a time as this," it's more powerful than the right word spoken at the wrong time.
Remarkable, Michael. And Esther's patience ultimately led to justice and deliverance. Psalm 37, verse 7, it states, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him." And that's exactly what Esther did. So, what does Esther's example teach us about trusting God's timing, especially when we feel pressured to act quickly?
That's such a good question. And Esther teaches us that waiting is not passive, it is purposeful. Her delay was not rooted in fear, but in faith. It's a different thing when you're not acting because you're fearful. Esther waited because she was preparing prayerfully and thinking strategically. She trusted God to orchestrate events behind the scenes, and she gave time for these events to play themselves out. So this aligns with Isaiah 40:31, which assures us that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. Psychologically, patience allows individuals to regulate stress, to gain clarity, and to make wiser decisions. So Esther's example demonstrates that discernment often requires both courage and restraint. Her wisdom also reflects James 1:5, which encourages believers to seek wisdom from God. Many of us are acting out of our own understanding. Esther, even though she was queen, realized that she needed to seek wisdom from God. So Esther sought divine guidance before taking actions, ensuring that her words would have maximum impact.
So that's both comforting and inspiring, Michael. Our own Lord understood the importance of divine timing. In John 7:6, Jesus said, "My time is not yet here." So, Michael, how does Esther's story point us toward Christ and his example of wisdom and discernment?
That's such a good question. So let me say that in terms of the how it points us to Christ, there profound similarity. Esther's story foreshadows Christ in these ways. Just as Esther risked her life to save her people, Jesus sacrificed his life to redeem humanity. Both stories demonstrate courage, obedience, and the trust in God's perfect plan. Jesus consistently demonstrated divine timing and self-restraint. In John 12:23, he declared, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." He waited for that hour before he acted. He acted neither prematurely nor impulsively, but in perfect alignment with the Father's will. So also, like Esther, Christ shows us that wisdom is not merely about action. It is about acting at the right time for the right purpose and in accordance with God's will.
So, Michael, as we close today, what are three closing thoughts for the listeners who may be going through oppression, adversity, or hardship?
I'd like to say to someone listening today that you should remember that God may be silent, but he is not absent. God's name is never mentioned in the book of Esther. That is one of the extraordinary thing about that book. God's name is not mentioned at all, but we see that he was actively working behind the scene. Secondly, I would say to you that patience rooted in prayer and fasting is not passivity, but power under control. And thirdly, I would like to say to you that your adversity could be the turning point to a chapter of greatness in your life.
Well, thank you, Michael, for such encouraging, inspiring, and informative discussion. You know, Esther's story reveals the power of courage, discernment, and divine timing. And it reminds us that God is always at work orchestrating his purposes even in the most uncertain circumstances. So if today's message has encouraged you, we invite you to share it with someone who may need hope and inspiration. You can replay this episode and past episode on Elim Counseling Services YouTube channel. The early bird rate is still available, so you are invited to join us at our upcoming healing retreat, June 12th to 14th, entitled Restored and Transformed. So this retreat will help you find freedom from emotional pain, break negative generational patterns, and heal deep wounds. So we encourage you to reserve your spot by going to elimcounselingministry.com to register. If you've been blessed by this ministry, please consider making a donation through Elim Mental Health Foundation.com. Until next time, this is your co-host, Denise Hart.
And Michael Hart, praying together that God would bless you in all your relationships and keep you sound in mind and pure in heart.